Let's take a tour of CloudFormation. CloudFormation is a service that lets you write code called template files that configure AWS infrastructure services for you. This is also called infrastructure as code. Typically, when you configure the infrastructure for an application, you have to create a VPC, create subnets, configure firewall settings, spin up EC2 instances, etc. When done manually, this is a very error-prone set of activities that it's hard to duplicate identically over and over again. It's a best practice to write code instead that creates the infrastructure for your applications. From the default dashboard, type in CloudFormation in the search box. Click on CloudFormation and look for the button that says Stack over on the right-hand side. A stack is a set of resources for running your application's infrastructure, such as the VPC, security groups, etc. You'll be using a template or code file to create a running stack. You can use a single template file to create lots of identical stacks, such as when you need an environment for production, and another for testing, and another for staging. Here, you see the first step in the wizard, where you specify the code file that will be used to generate your AWS resources. If this is your first time through, it's helpful to see a sample template that has already been prepared for you. So I'm going to click on Use Sample Template, and then I'm going to pop open this drop-down option. The example stacks spin up some common environments such as a single zone LAMP stack, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, or a multi-zone LAMP stack backed by a load balancer. Let's select the first one. Notice that this file is stored at an S3 bucket URL, or just at a URL. When you develop your own templates, you will likely host them at an S3 URL as well. Let's see what this file looks like. So I'm going to copy this, copy, paste. Note that this file is JSON, meaning that it has lots of curly braces and lots of name value parameters. Some of the key sections here are parameters right here. And if I go down quite a ways, then eventually I'm going to get to a portion that says resources. And this is one of the key ones, and it's critical within your file. Notice that whenever you see type listed within the resource section, like right here, this is identifying a particular AWS resource. So in this case, this is where we're configuring an EC2 instance. And if I scroll down a fair amount of distance, eventually I'll see another resource, which is a security group. And at least at this part, potentially the content here looks understandable. You see some rules for incoming rules, like port 80 and port 20 are going to be allowed and where they're allowed from. Okay, let's go back to the wizard now. And right here, one of my options is to view this template in a designer. Okay, this is a visual way of looking at your template. So let's go ahead and look around at a few different options. First, I'm going to click right here. And if you recall in the original template file that there were two resources there, and those two resources are shown right here graphically. If you want, you can build template files from scratch or add to this current template file by grabbing hundreds of things and services that are over here on the left-hand side, dragging them onto the page. And you can also see how they're related using things like arrows. These little options right here that are colors represent different parameters or features that you can set on a particular resource that you have dragged onto the page. Look lower on the page and you see the same template file that we see up here, but now it's color-coded. So it's got all the same stuff. Also notice that if I click on one of these graphical icons, that it jumps me to the resource specification for that particular thing. So here's the one for the security. Oh, this is for the instance, and this is for the security group. Another interesting feature you have here is you can click on these radio buttons, and you can change the view of your template file from JSON to YAML. YAML doesn't have all those curly braces. It makes it a little bit shorter. In total for this sample file, it's a little under 750 lines in YAML, and it's close to 1,000 with JSON because of all the extra curly braces. Okay, so from here, I could just say, hey, launch my stack, but I'm going to jump out to the regular wizard and start it over again. Either one is going to accomplish the exact same thing. So I'm going to say close this without saving it. Again, I'll say create stack, use a sample template. I'll select this first one, and then I'm going to click next. Okay, within this particular template, there is a portion called parameters, and because these things are specified, this causes this second step to reveal a bunch of input fields that are necessary for this particular set of resources. So if you were paying attention, you notice that there's a MySQL database. How are you going to set up a database unless you give it some usernames, passwords, database names, etc.? This gives us an option down here to specify all the things that it's prompting us for in the template file, which are subsequently used to start up and configure the EC2 instance with, in this case, a MySQL database. All right, separate from that, we need to give this set of resources a name. And so let's just call this production website as an example. And then I'll just put in some filler material here for parameters. So we've got a MySQL database. And so I'll just type in anything. So just some silly things. You do need to have a key pair set up ahead of time in order to facilitate access, like SSH access to this to the instance itself when it's spun up, at least according to this particular template. And I'm going to go ahead and click next. There's some additional things I could do related to permissions. I'm not going to worry about that today. And my next step will be to view the overall things that I've specified. So here's a summary of what I'm intending to do. And I'm now going to click Create Stack. Now this is going to take a few minutes, but right here, the first tab that I'm on says Events. And notice it says it's trying to create the overall stack right now. I gave it that name, Production Website. If I refresh this, notice it is going from oldest at the bottom to most recent at the top. And it has completed one of the tasks, which is to create the security group. And the actual web server instance is not complete yet. So I can keep on refreshing this until things show up. It takes a couple minutes. In the meantime, let's look at some of the other stuff that's here. One of the other options is the template. So here, especially after the fact, if a stack is running in my CloudFormation environment, I can see how that stack was created. I can see what information was used to create that stack in terms of the parameters that were passed to it. The key part of this is, like I said before, from this template file is the resources section. So that corresponds to AWS resources like a VPC or an EC2 instance. As the resources are completed, they will show up here. So this is kind of an overall running log of all the steps that it's doing, like when it's in progress versus complete. In this case, there are actually 2 resources that need to be configured. And so this kind of limits my event information to just those 2 resources. Obviously, creating a firewall rule is pretty quick, but creating an instance and then installing Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP is something that takes a little bit of time because it has to go out to the internet and download some of those patches and then subsequently install them. So it does take a couple of minutes, and look, it is now already done. Okay, so if I go back over here to events, I can see most recently that the whole stack has completed. I can see when the web server EC2 instance was completed and when the security group was completed. Okay, over here on Stack Info, I can see an overview of what's going on with this set of resources. And as part of this particular template, it generates an output line when it runs, which is the URL for the website. And so here it is. Let's right click on it and open it up. And look at that. We have a successfully running EC2 instance properly configured that was generated by our CloudFormation template. Now that we're done with that, we want to get rid of it so that we're not being billed. One of the nice things about templates is that it provides a nice clean way to keep in mind and track everything that you spun up. So let's go ahead and so when you click delete, it deletes the VPC, the security groups, whatever mess of things that you included in your application infrastructure. It creates them all at once when you use a template, and it deletes them all at once when you delete the stack. So let's go ahead and delete this. And I click delete. And I can now go over to events, and I see that the delete is in progress. And a couple minutes from now, it will say that the delete has completed successfully.